Is the freedom you've experienced just the time between your repeated failures? Join us today as we talk about what it takes to really be free.
Hi, this is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell here with Savage Marriage.
We're going to talk about how God is healing and restoring marriages today from betrayal, addictions, and the wounds of their past.
And what he did in our marriage, he can do in yours too.
Well, it's great to be with everybody today, and I'm here without Priscilla today because I have a special guest with me, Paul Speed from Whatever It Takes Ministries. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Phil. It's great to be here.
I first met Paul about 5 years ago, and it was when I was in a real problem, but I didn't know what to do in my life. I was consumed by immorality and all sorts of problems, and I got introduced to Paul by a good friend of both of ours, and that guy told me he knew one guy who could really produce sustainable results, and it's not that it's Paul, but it's God working through Paul. And Paul got on the phone with me, and Paul, we've never looked back, and you've had an amazing impact on my life, and really gave me some hard truth when I needed it right there at the beginning.
Wow. I'm grateful God caused our paths to cross, and I was able to be part of that in your life. You've been a lot of that in my life also, and I appreciate you and Priscilla both. So this is a real honor to be able to do this with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I think everybody will really enjoy what we're talking about today, because today we're going to be hitting an issue around how to be free. And I imagine people even looking at that title, it's triggered some interest in people, because I think we all deal with this area of freedom in our life. And I know you've been doing this for, I don't know, over 15 years, I think, trying to help people walk toward freedom.
Yeah, it started. Ginny and I were married like 14 years, which is my story. And then similar to you, then I kind of came to my crossroads, my crisis, and 14 years into marriage when I came clean with Ginny. That really is when life started for me. Up until that point, all I knew was bondage and just replicating sin patterns and trying this and that. Whatever religious advice I got, practical advice I got, I tried. Just didn't seem to help. And then through that process, one of the things Jenny told me, she said, you had glimpses of hope over the years. She said, where you thought you were doing well, and therefore the last thing you ever wanted to do was make it right with me. And that was true. And she said, it's as if, she said, Satan himself had you on a fishing line, and every now and then you can take that release off, whatever that is, push that button on the old rod and reels, and the spindle would just go. And she said, like a fish, you would just swim and go, hallelujah, I'm free. And as soon as you decide to do something noble or good or impactful, to start reaching into her life or the kids or do devotions with the family, anything, it's like the enemy would say, no, you're not. And he had snapped that reel you right back in. And she said, you would think you're free, but you weren't. You still had the hook in your mouth. And Phil, that's the way, my life was right. She was right. In other words, I thought I had periods of freedom because I didn't act out some particular sin pattern, but it really wasn't freedom.
Yeah. I think I know that fishing line. Paul.
Probably on the same hook. It was a treble hook.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, I know when I started down the path here that you really set me on, there were two things that Priscilla and I did that were really impactful. I went to a 4 Days to Freedom intensive with you, and which I didn't even believe that was possible. 4 days to freedom. I had struggled with this my entire life, right? Including years of counseling and everything else. And then Priscilla went to 4 Days to Hope. But as I started thinking about this, even though one says freedom, one says hope, they both really kind of deal with freedom.
They really do. I think when it comes down to it, a lot of guys that I meet, and you've probably met over the years, I meet guys with a host of issues, not just in the sexual nature, not necessarily adultery or and so forth, or pornography, but it can be drugs, alcohol, any sort of addiction like that, gambling, stealing, shoplifting, you name it. And whatever they come with, the consensus is the same, and that is they can't stop. In other words, it just continues to rule and reign in their lives and destroy them. And they want to be free. And what's interesting is we keep looking if I can just stop the behavior. But what I like on the weekend is helping a guy learn that the behavior is there for a reason, and it's a deeper reason inside of every man. And that's why I think that is true, just like you said, for the women and 4 Days to Hope. Part of that was because I started 4 Days to Freedom first, so Jenny had to come up with a different name, and
Yeah.
she thought about forgiveness. They batted around several other different names, and finally stuck on hope. But I think you're right. It does an internal work in us all, and that we really want to be free, and that freedom comes inside our soul and who we are, our emotions, and therefore that affects our spirit. And I think because of that, the outward behavior begins to take care of itself. It begins to change, and before long, wow, you look back and you're living a life free from what you would have considered so many of the things that had you bound. So they are very similar. The teaching and the concepts that goes on the weekend is vastly different from what I walk guys through versus what the women's program is about, but the outcome is kind of similar.
Paul, if you had to describe, the guys showing up at these programs, I mean, what are they dealing with? And if we had to talk about areas of freedom for them, what do you see predominantly going on there?
Well, I would say at least half are coming because they're in a crisis. I do have single guys and I have married guys. I try not to take under 17 unless a father is with them. And then I'm still pretty selective on that. But single guys, married guys, they're usually at a roadblock, a crossroads. They're at their wits' end sometimes. For a married guy, it could be my wife has now kicked me out. She can't take this anymore. Or I've just been exposed with whatever that issue may be. So they're kind of in a crisis. Others are there because someone's encouraged them or invited them to come. They kind of know that they've had a struggle. For a lot of guys, especially in this day and age, pornography, masturbation, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But a lot of guys, unless they can explain how they're walking in that freedom, they usually have a struggle with it somewhere. And unfortunately for me, Phil, growing up in the church and so many other programs that I was a part of, the answers I used to get, well, Paul, if you're single, then just get married. Paul, why are you worried about this? That's the problem is you should only worry about today. Paul, you need to just memorize more scripture. It was just always more work, more work, more work. And no one really ever helped me see, number one, why I was stuck the way I was stuck, and then how to get free from that. And almost every guy that walks through the door, some of them look like they have it all together. That they're not even sure why they're there. Somebody sent me to this, or my wife's making me come. I will say that I've never had a guy attend that left saying, "I wish I wouldn't have came."
Yeah.
Whether it's
Mhm.
life changing, completely life changing for them, or on the least, it gives them the tools they need to begin to operate in their life for the rest of their life. That's going to impact them in an incredible way.
What would you say the opportunity is for guys walking? I mean, a lot of these guys, they don't even really know what freedom looks like, I think. And how do you explain that to them and help them understand really what freedom could be in their life?
Well, for a lot of guys, I think it's it takes a while to to take the mask off. In other words, for us to get real with one another. And part of the weekend, I guess, even why it's 4 days, 3 nights, is really for that. It's for a live-in environment where we're all together. I think guys begin to feel comfortable really quickly because I'm not there and the other leaders aren't there with pretenses, looking down on them. We've all walked this walk before. And for a lot of us, it's almost comical to look back, at some of the things we did, scratching our head. Why in the world did I do that? Or how in the world did I get into that? But I think it helps a guy understand that we really do kind of feel their pain, know where they've walked. And when a guy can begin to see that and I think get comfortable, then he begins to look a little deeper inside. Because for a lot of times, I'll have a guy that'll say, well, I used to struggle with that, but I've been free for about a month now. And I'm like, a month? That's freedom to you? In other words,
Hmm.
but that's the way I used to judge it in my life. In other words, freedom was this period of sobriety. And if I could just put this in other words, if instead of my lapses being every day, if they were only once a week, then that was a form of freedom. But it's not
Mm.
freedom at all. So part of it is just getting guys to recognize no, freedom is lifetime. Freedom is a change of the way you think and therefore the way you live your life. I've seen it over and over and over. When a guy begins to understand what we teach on the weekend and he buys into it, oh boy, he's just liberated. And it's just a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah, I think in the past I equated freedom, even though I probably wasn't experiencing much of it at all. But
Mm.
there were lots of things I was doing. I mean, there were meeting with guys, and there was apps on my phone, and all these types of things. And I think what I've come to understand is that wasn't freedom at all because I was
Mm-mm.
tethered to all these other things.
Yeah. Well, you told me you had been in counseling for years and years, and that the answer was pretty much learn to manage it really without messing up really, really bad.
Yeah, and it's a lot of that was my own massaging of that answer, because I wasn't honest with the counselor. I mean, I think the
Mm.
counselor was
Well, that's true.
trying to help me a lot, but I didn't. I wasn't honest. I wasn't forthright. I had a lot of pride and arrogance trying to manage that, and so I wasn't really doing what I needed to be doing there. But as I even away from the counselors, I started talking to other people in groups, it became clear that I might not be tethered to porn, but boy, I'm going to be tethered to a whole bunch of things the rest of my life trying to deal with this. And that just wouldn't feel like freedom, I think, at the end of the
Right.
day.
That makes complete sense.
What do you think the biggest obstacle is to receiving freedom?
I would say what I've seen over the years, I think is, I guess it would start with the level of pride. And that gets manifested in many ways. A pride of, I don't really need this. I can handle this. Because I think for us, there's a part of, I don't want to look weak. In other words, I want to look like I have it all together. And I guess at the root of it is, I don't want to look like I've been a fool my whole life and haven't understood this. But I think that's where a lot of guys are. We really haven't known, Phil, how to walk out freedom in our lives, in our minds, and our souls. And so I think that is a large part of it. The other side is the guy that really, I think it's just as prideful as the guy that just cops out and says, "I just can't do it,"
Yeah.
or I don't believe it's possible. It's good for you, but I don't know about for me. And
Yeah.
one of the things on the weekends I try to do is have multiple testimonies of guys who have walked in pretty much every walk of life, just about with every struggle you can imagine, and how they found freedom. You're one of those guys that impacts man after man on my weekend because of your story. And I think that's part of helping a guy believe that it's possible for him, because I think most men desire to be free. In other words, we want it. We want to be different. A married guy doesn't want to destroy his family. I don't think that's, he doesn't have a wedding day and pick a bride all with the goal of one day I want to crush her heart through my adultery, or through my porn use. But yet that's where we end up because they don't know the battle they're in. Or a single guy, wants to live in bondage the rest of life. They don't, but they don't believe it's possible. They do want it, but something has to change in that belief. And that's one of the things I try to help guys get to on a weekend, is believing it's possible, not for Paul Speed or Phil Fretwell or somebody else, these other guys, but you know what? I've been looking at this all wrong. I've been putting the wrong things into practice in my life. I'm going to take a risk, trust God, and do the things these guys are telling me to do and see if it's possible. And those are the ones that really come alive. And I think God takes that level of unbelief and flips it. And God wants to show himself strong in a man's life. And
Yeah.
that's just a beautiful part.
Well, I'm envisioning people listening, and they're not even grasping the enormity of what you just said here,
Mm.
because I can think about discussions I've had with guys, and I'll talk about this freedom and everything, but every question they ask is around a paradigm of failure.
Wow.
So it's not like, how am I going to walk in this freedom? It's, what do I do when I fail?
Mm.
Like, if I fail, who do I tell?
Mm.
And so their whole thinking and their paradigm is around an expectation that they won't be free. And I think the root of it is that they do not believe they can be free. They've never experienced it. They've never seen it before. Don't even know anybody that's been like this.
Hmm.
And so to suggest that they can walk in freedom outside of all the other things that people tell them to do is something they just can't even grasp. So they're automatically going to what happens when I fail?
Right. No, I totally agree with you. That was my life. It really was. And I remember coming clean with Jenny at age 39 and thinking life's over. In other words, I don't have anyone saying, "Hey, Paul, here's the blueprint. Here's what you do. You're going to come clean with her. You're going to go through these steps. You're going to talk to others. We're going to go through." In other words, I didn't really have anything, and so there was a part of me that just felt hopeless. And it took about a year to 2 year period of Jenny and I walking through this process of God teaching us what we share now on a weekend. But I'm so grateful it happened. But somewhere during that period, and it came very quickly, I could tell something changed in me. I could
Mm,
tell my faith or belief that it was possible for me to change came alive. And I think you're right. I think most guys have given up in that area partly because exactly what you said, they haven't really met anyone who they see is walking in freedom and can articulate and show them how to do it.
yeah, I remember 5 years ago when I went to 4 Days to Freedom, that was one of the questions you asked right at the beginning. Do you guys believe you can be free? And me sitting there, I thought, are you kidding me? Of course I can't be free. If I thought I could be free, why would I be sitting in this place with all these
Mm,
guys, you know? But I didn't understand it. I didn't understand your question. I didn't understand where I was, you know?
wow.
And it was just it was a hard time, but now I look back on it and I say, "Man, praise the Lord. I believe it." Not only do I believe it, I've experienced it, right?
Wow.
And
That's
it's
right.
just a different setup now.
That's right. That's right. One of the things I tell guys during the weekend, because they're just like what you said, Phil, and that's just the way I felt. I just can't believe the hopeless feeling that, okay, so here's one more time. I'm going to try again, but I've struck out every time in my life with this and I've never gained victory. So what does this freedom look like? But I see guys and I tell them, I said, if you'll begin to walk this out, and it's really dealing with a deeper part inside of us, because coming if porn or adultery or massage parlors, prostitutes, masturbation or whatever, if that's the issue, well, I can show you guys that don't do that don't even walk with God. If that's the freedom, then we're really missing the boat there. But there's something deeper inside of us. The reality is those things are just a fruit of a deeper problem
Yeah.
inside of all of us. And if we can begin to get to that level and walk through those things and find that's the inward freedom that creates and gives ground to the outward freedom that you and I are living. When we begin to get to that level, that's when I tell you, I see guy after guy after guy, their spiritual life just explodes, goes off the charts. We spent so many years trying to get close to God, get close to others, do the right things religiously, and yet we kept dying morally. And once we get our eyes off the religious side, and I'm not saying that we turn our back on God, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying stop looking at those things to change what's going on inside of you in your soul area. God's given us a path on how to make those things right. Scripture says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And life changes when that happens. The outside begins to change. You're walking in freedom over things you never thought possible, but it's not being generated from some outward behavior modification or control. It's happening from the inside.
Mhm.
And when that happens, your spiritual life, mine, whoever's doing it, what I've seen is the connection with God, the connection with others just goes to a new level that you never thought possible. That's why
Mhm.
sometimes I'll ask, some guys will say, so you're saying I'll never go back, whatever. I'm saying, usually when you taste that good, you don't want to go back. In
Yeah.
other words, you're like, it's too good being close to Priscilla. I don't want to go back.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so true. And, Paul, how many years have you been doing these weekends with guys?
Started in 2010, so it's been about 12 years.
12 years. And so over the course of 12 years, you've worked with hundreds and hundreds, I don't know, maybe over 1,000 guys at this point.
Yes, it's been over 1,000. It's really remarkable.
when you are finishing a weekend and you've spent all this time with these guys, and I know we always say there's no silver bullet here, right? But
Right.
how would you say a guy looks and what traits does he exhibit? What has he gotten at the end of this weekend where he leaves and you go, I think that guy's going to make it. What's happened in his life?
Well, I hate to say, I have failed many, many times at looking at a guy leaving thinking there is no way that guy's going to get it. And you
But
know
he
what,
does.
Phil? He blows my mind with his ability to take the things that on the weekend I'm just thinking this guy is not getting it. But he walks out of there and he begins to, what I see, try God, test God, saying, you know what, then I'm going to do this. And he does it and he sees the results and he wants to do it again and again and again. And before on, this kid is, or this man is soaring. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. That guy, one of my good friends, Chris, he asked me on a Saturday on the weekend, he said, all right, so I know you probably don't want to do this, but what percentage of success do you think I have? In other words, if you had to put money on me, would you do it today? And I said, that doesn't really matter. It's really your choice. You need to go out here. And he said, and he kept pestering me with it. No. I just want to know, what do you think about me? Do you think I'm really good? Finally, I said, you know what? Honestly, I don't have much hope in you. and I felt horrible saying it. He was like, why? And I said, because you're full of pride. You're full of pride and you keep worrying about things like this. And,
Yeah.
but you know what? He's one of my best friends. He's done incredibly well. His wife has 4 kids. He's walking in freedom. He helps lead my weekends. So, Phil, I tell you, it's amazing to see. It's available for any man who's willing to take God by the hand, to trust him, and to walk out this path of freedom. And it's really, though, and that's what I love about it is I can teach you everything on how to do it, but Phil, you still had to choose to do it.
Yeah.
And you did.
Yeah. I remember at the end of this weekend, I asked you what do you see in guys if you have to look back on him and you say, well, this guy, you're doing like the postmortem, right? This guy made it or he did make it.
Right.
What happened with the guys that didn't make it? And you said it boils down to, did they follow through on what they learned here? Did they complete their action step? And there was so much, and I remember in my action steps around humility and being open and broken, and with my wife and my kids and all that type of stuff. There were hard things, but I walked through them all. And we've seen that with our Savage Marriage groups as well. They come through, they start it, they have action steps. And when we hear about a couple that a year later wants to come talk to us again because it's all kind of fallen apart, we always go back to, well, tell me about your action steps. How did you do? And I think 9 times out of 10, if they're having struggles, they probably did not follow through on what they said they were going to do.
I think that's very true. For the listeners on my weekend, your weekends and so forth, there's a plan of action. In other words, I want you to leave the weekend with some steps. In other words, that God has shown you based on what you've heard, that would hopefully give you the best chance or path for success to walk out this new way of life. And we get to refine those over the weekend and so forth. And you're right. Most guys, when it comes back to them, and they tell me, oh, I bombed out. Oh, my wife divorced me. Oh, whatever. And then when I ask that question, just like you did, I see the same thing. In other words, and I say, did you ever go and do this? Well, no, I was going to, but in other words, and they fell short on carrying out the path that I think they clearly came up with. And had they walked it out, I think the results would have been different.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, these weekends, they wind up with guys on 4 days to freedom, and many of them are dealing with sexual immorality issues and things like that. Freedom that has they want because the bondage has showed up in their bodies, right? They're addicted to this or addicted to that.
Right.
But there's a whole other level of freedom that we have to deal with, and that's in our souls, right? And that winds up being covered a lot with the women at 4 Days to Hope, but the guys need it too.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. I think, again, I mentioned it earlier. So many of the things, Phil, I think that you looked at in your life and mine, thinking if I could just stop this behavior, then I'm going to be free. I'm going to be different. I'm going to be a man God can use. And that's not really true. And most of the time, if not all the time, the behavior, by the time you see it at that point, it's there because of something deeper, just like what you're talking about. It's there
Mhm.
because of something deeper inside of us.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to think about when you were struggling through all your immorality issues years and years ago, I mean, you've gotten free from that, but what else did all this freedom do in your life? What other types of freedom did it create for, would you say?
The freedom in my soul and my spirit, just being able to connect. In other words, number one, with my wife and with others. I had 6 children, and but I was very shallow. I didn't know how to communicate. I definitely could not go to a feeling level of emotion with someone. And I think that was one of the big things I began to see in my life. In other words, that I was able, not only with God, but with others, a level of transparency and openness and honesty, empathy with others. It was just the bondage that I was in sexually, if you want to call it morally, it was there, but it was there impacting every area of my life.
Mm,
In other words, I
yeah.
really couldn't connect with others, and this was just the fruit of it. So as I began to find out and discover what freedom was inside, it really did impact lots of areas of my life like those.
Well, Paul, I'd like us to do a part two on this that really deals with the freedom in our kind of our mind, will, and emotions, right? The stuff that's
Mhm.
maybe not manifesting in our bodies so much, but it's manifesting in the way we feel. It can result in depression and all these types of things that we see people dealing with. And because I think we could have a whole nother discussion around that. And I think that's something that would really interest people because, not everybody deals with sexual immorality issues, but certainly everybody deals with anxiety and problems in their soul and
Mm,
things that they make them feel like they're not free.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, you okay with doing a part two to tackle that
Yeah,
one?
absolutely. I'd love to.
Terrific. So, Paul, if they have questions on how to get to a 4 Days to Freedom meeting or a 4 Days to Hope meeting, how do they do that?
Phil, the best way would be to go to our website, WIT for whatever it takes, WITministries.com or whatever it takes ministries.com. On the website, click on events on the top, and a listing for the rest of the year is there. We try to be at least 6 months out on those, and we do them around the country. So you should be able to find one there. But if you've got questions or anything that we can help with from that, feel free to email us through the website. Phone number on there is 336-310-5050. And they can contact us that way, but we'd be happy to help.
Well, Paul, you've been so great to have on today, and I just appreciate you so much. And looking forward to picking up here on part two.
All right. Thank you, Phil.
All righty. Okay, everybody, thanks so much. And join us on the next podcast. We'll have Paul back on talking about issues of freedom in our soul. Until then, we'll see you the next time. This is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell. Thanks for listening. Our book, Savage Marriage: Triumph Over Betrayal and Sexual Addiction, is now available on Amazon.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Savage Marriage Ministries. Also, join our Savage Marriage community at savagemarriageministries.com.
And remember, it's God who is at work in your savage adventure.